Hello there, and welcome to Creatives in Conversation, a podcast series created by myself, visionary artist Roberto Bachao. In this podcast, I'll be speaking with artist and arts facilitator Katie Watson.
Hello, Katie. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. It's getting quite dark early now, which is for me is like setting myself up on my side. I'm having to think about lights a lot more. Um, I don't know if you've had a, or have you noticed that the light is just disappearing earlier and earlier?
Yeah, because when I finish work, I usually come straight to the studio, and I've been getting away with just not turning any of the artificial lights on for ages, and now I'm starting to put them on, so it's a bit disappointing. And the paintings look totally different now. All the colours are really different than what I'm used to. But I guess it's probably a good thing because galleries never have natural light, so maybe it's going to be a good thing.
That's an interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, because yeah, there's already a few galleries that I can think of just off the top of my head where it's naturally lit. So yeah, that's a fair point. That which kind of brings us quite nicely into my first question, which is, could you describe to us what it is that you create, Katie?
Um, so the kind of I kind of don't really feel like they fit into the categories of like painting or sculpture, but I feel like they're sort of more like objects. And I think that's sort of to do with like one, the materials that I use, but also the way I approach things. Like I don't think I'm a very painterly painter or a very sculptural sculptor. I think I kind of just treat things as objects, and yeah, the kind of force around between there. But I kind of move between painting, sculpture, drawing, and collage. And I think what I do is sort of my process is kind of investigating different ways that we can communicate with each other. Um, and at the minute, that's through purely visual means. And I think as well, I think a lot about changing attitudes to like fix it, sort of DIY cultures, and how things are changing and how we feel about that. So yeah, it's quite investigative, I guess.
I was thinking a little bit about your work, Katie. As I'd purchased I guess it's like a workstation that was a flat pack. Well, it wasn't flat pack, but you had to put it together, and the instructions were so bad that I was getting really frustrated with this instruction because there was one image there wasn't any arrows or anything like, which when I've looked through your work, there's arrows, there's direction, there's it feels like it's describing a lot more than these instructions were that I had. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting choice of visual language to sort of base your work on. And I can see in some of your work that there's references to like computer like images. So there's like a doc file image that I've seen, with like the folded corner.
Yeah,
And it's all really interesting things because it's like I see them and I just recognize them straight away. So it's an interesting starting point.
yeah, I think it's something that I've thought about quite a lot because, like my parents kind of like in the mid 60s, and like I'm always saying to my dad, "Oh, Dad, will you show us how to build this thing, or how do I do this? How can I fix this?" And then he'll ring me and he's like, "Katie, how do I get my documents up again?" And I think that it's this like really nice exchange of information where like things have moved very quickly, and then as a kind of consequence of that, like kind of our knowledge is totally different in the space of one generation. We know completely different things, but then those things are both really useful to each other and we can help each other out. and I think it's like a really nice relationship, and I like that sort of teaching each other things, and that transferring of information and exchange of information. Yeah, I think it's something that's, yeah, I think it's really nice. I think about it a lot.
Well, I think you've kind of chosen the perfect visual language that kind of sort of crosses that boundary that, I guess you're building bridges in a sense of like being able to communicate a direction, an instruction by using that kind of, well, more than familiar type of visual language. Yeah, it's really interesting terrain, isn't it? Because, with like those sort of IKEA instructions that you see, they're always directing you to do something physical, and then you're kind of then bringing in a bit of the sort of the virtual, which well, to my mind, I always see as almost like another space that you can explore with your cursor or whatever. So it's interesting that you kind of like merging these things together.
Yeah, so I think I kind of started making them when, so there's this episode of The Simpsons that I watched, and it's I don't know if you've seen this one, but it's the one where Homer gets his barbecue kit. It's quite an old one, and he takes the kit home, and it's like a self-assembly sort of thing, and he takes it home, and he's holding the box up, so the box takes up the entire screen, and then he's like really happy with himself, and then he moves his hands down and then looks at what he's actually made, and it looks absolutely nothing like the box, and it's like this like mishmash of things just absolutely everywhere. And then it kind of, I think later on in the episode, it ends up that this like gallery owner or curator like picks it up, and it's like, oh, it's contemporary art, and like I just thought that was like absolutely hilarious. And then I immediately started collecting all these different manuals, and kind of, yeah, I think I accidentally do quite a lot of things that I think are funny, and I don't think it's funny to anyone else, but like I don't think a lot about humor in art and sort of like satire and things, but then I think, yeah, I think I like the sort of playfulness of doing things that are like a little bit silly, and it's definitely like something I do when I'm at work, because my job is like I work with I'm like I work with like workshops. I do workshops with people who have learning disabilities and people on the autistic spectrum, and like that's quite playful, and I think it's like something that's really important in art making.
It's when you were describing that Simpsons episode, I remembered it like the back of my hand. I don't know whether that's maybe because we're both artists, that one was, yeah, I remember it being about, yeah, I forgot the beginning bit. I think I remember seeing obviously him pulling down this failure of a product that he tried to create down the street, and then somebody seeing it and saying, this is art, this is outsider art, this is beautiful. So it's interesting that that's kind of stuck in your mind, and in particular as well about the instructions, because there's kind of like a twofold thing there, isn't there, which is like an introduction to the art world, which is almost accidental, and then also the instructions. So he's trying to follow something, and the failure kind of, made the story, as it were.
Yeah, and I think quite often when people sort of see my work, they relate to a time when they've tried to put together a piece of furniture and just made an absolute mess of it. And I think there's like a shared frustration, and I think also that's like, I think there's a bit of a shared frustration with like, I mean, I don't think people want to buy IKEA furniture and like flat pack furniture all the time, and I think, but it's really easy and it's really cheap, so I think there's sort of a frustration with that. So there's a kind of like tension between, I need to put some furniture on my flat, and I want to not be really terrible to the planet, because it's just so wasteful, but it's very easy, isn't it?
You're completely right. You're completely right, and it's so interesting that you're thinking about these things, about materials as well, and you're thinking about, with the flat pack world, because it's not necessarily always the best materials or the best quality materials. And it's interesting that you've introduced them into your works, so sort of bringing them back out and going, I'm sort of referencing that again, but then so you kind of do this sort of overlaying of two things together, which is like the materials of the IKEA, which is usually some sort of chipboard or some sort of coating over the top, and then also the instructions pasting that over the top. So it's really interesting. You overlapping so many things together, and what you mentioned there about your role as an arts facilitator, and that's something that's quite close to my heart as well, because it's something that I used to do. I used to work for not with that client group. I used to work with a different client group, mental health difficulties instead, adults with mental health difficulties. And I can see the connection between that sort of the ability to be descriptive of a process, especially if it's something creative, which I guess think about flat pack, it is, isn't it? You're trying to create something, trying to bring these elements together and bring it together. And thinking about, in your role where you're trying to communicate, like, say if it's painting or something like that, you're trying to communicate, right, okay, how do you make this color? Okay, where you add in this color and then you kind of tickling this other color and bringing that color in. You try to, you only want to, because if you add too much, then it throws the whole thing. And I think there is something overlooked, or maybe not necessarily recognized, that when you're trying to teach something that hasn't got, if you had a set of instructions on how to paint, you wouldn't get the full scope of what painting could be, or how that could be instructed, just simply through words or pictures or whatever. But when somebody's like moving their hand around or showing you gestures and that kind of thing, it's this other level of communication, which the instructions of the IKEA are probably more what you're doing with the arrows, and you're able to sort of communicate something that's probably not as effective as two people speaking and using their hands and such. So it's really interesting. I don't know if there wasn't a question in there. I was kind of just bouncing off what you were saying a little bit there.
Yeah, I remember when I hadn't worked there very long, a couple of years ago, I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who is very hard of hearing, and is it's kind of, we kind of communicate mostly in hand gestures, not in sign language, just smiles and like because they're like mostly non-verbal. And I can remember them trying to describe a member of staff that used to work there by pointing to random, well, not random to them, but to things in the room. So they would, I can remember them holding up a red pencil, and then so they've got red hair, pointing to the hair, and then would kind of act like, kind of do hand gestures like the person who we used to work with. And I thought that's a really interesting way of describing things. And I can remember making a painting after that conversation of it was kind of like red plus pencil equals, and I just thought, I thought that was really interesting. And I think a lot of the time when I'm at work, it's very, you sort of demonstrate things more than you talk about things, and I don't think there's many environments where that is the case. I think especially in art, because I think sometimes it feels like people talk about art much more than they actually do it. But yeah, it feels like the absolute opposite there, where you kind of like show someone how to do one thing with a gesture, and then for the next hour they're meticulously doing exactly the same gesture that you showed them how to do. So yeah, it's interesting how different that is.
I think you're kind of privy to a world of communication, which most people don't see. And the more you talk about, I guess, what you do in your role as an arts facilitator, I can't help but picture the artworks that you're making in my mind. So I'm picturing, these sort of movements, these colors as well. Like you're obviously thinking about color when you're making these pictures. And is there anything to that with your colors, or is that something that's very intentional, or do you find that it's something maybe a bit more intuitive?
I think we work. Sorry, did you mean when I'm in my own studio practice, or when I'm working at work?
I was meaning, yeah, specifically with your own studio practice, so your own artworks, because I notice obviously you're picking particular colors, and sometimes you're revealing the material that it's on, and then sometimes you're covering the material. So I'm curious to know whether there's any significance to the colors that you've chosen. Like, do you find? I was just thinking, if we're thinking about images that are made to communicate an instruction, I'm wondering, is there any significance to the colors that's communicating that instruction? Like, am I more alert if there's a particular type of blue that you're putting on the I was going to say canvas, but I don't think it's necessarily always canvas for yourself, not for what I've seen anyway. So yeah, I'm wondering if there's a significance to the colors.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of the time I intentionally use more striking colours for things that I want to feel more significant in the painting. So like something that I want people to look at straight away. So if there's like a particular movement that I really want someone to look at immediately, that'll be bright red, like real primary colour, bright red. And then sometimes if it's things that I kind of want people to work out a little bit later, they'll be like maybe in a less of a contrast in colour, or it'll be in like a wash. But I think I always say, oh, my paintings are not very painterly, but I think sometimes I do. Obviously, I'm using paint, and I do things like, oh, like this will be like, I don't know how well you can see this one piece, but there's kind of like washes of colour. But I think, yeah, when I was at art school, I was put in the painting studios, and I kind of always felt like I shouldn't be in here. I don't belong in here with all of you. Like we're doing something completely different. Because I think, yeah, my approach to it was totally, in the way that I thought about painting was, my paintings was like, didn't feel painterly. But yeah, I do think a lot about colour, and I think that's something that's kind of one of the main things that I think about when I'm making a painting. But I only ever work one layer at a time. So, and I think that's something to do with how obsessed I am with manuals. So like you can't skip ahead to the end. Like you have to do everything one by one in a really methodical way. And I think that's accidentally what my practice has turned into. So I never know what it's going to look like in the end. It's always one step at a time. And I never let myself think about what I'm going to do next till that layer's dried, for the layer before it's dried. So yeah, it's quite so sometimes the colours are a bit, the kind of reacting to the one before it. Like I don't pick out a whole colour scheme for the entire thing. It's just like, I like this one colour, so that's what the first bit's going to be. And then the next bit, like, oh, them two colours would dance together in a really nice way. They would argue with each other in a horrible but nice way. And then I kind of just see what happens after that. But it's, yeah, it's kind of, I just see what happens.
It sounds really methodical. It sounds really, yeah, as you say, step by step. It sounds like you're fully embodying what it is that you're trying to communicate. So yeah, I've always, well, I haven't always, but quite recently I've kind of got stuck with this idea that all art that people make is autobiographical, and I can't help but think that with yourself, and in particular, you know, the work that you create, the processes that you do, your job role, it's kind of perhaps capturing a state of being that you maybe are in at the moment. So it's quite interesting. I'm wondering, like, what your background was to get to where you. I know you mentioned about the Simpsons episode, and that's obviously been quite poignant for you. Maybe it has. Maybe you've had that link later on, but I'm curious to know, I guess, how you came into the visual arts.
It definitely wasn't something that happened in school. Like I grew up in Washington, which is like very working class, very like, no, you'll go and work at Nissan. You're not gonna go and be an artist. And then when I was at college, my mum started doing an art degree. And then I was like, oh, okay. I think she started it because she said that she wanted some nice paintings for the house. And then obviously just absolutely fell in love with it and was like, I never want to stop now. I'm an artist now. So that, I think that for me was like, oh, I could be an artist. This is like an actual thing that could happen. So that was really great, because it definitely wasn't encouraged. Like it was never even like a thought. And then so I did a foundation course at Sunderland, which was really good because it was kind of an introduction to sort of everything. So that was, you got to like play around, which is the thing that I love to do the most. And then I was doing quite a lot of kind of architectural stuff, which I think, just like you were saying, is quite, autobiographical. Like my dad was a town planner, so I think it's all sort of feeding in, isn't it? And I can remember when I was at college going to see the Apollo Pavilion and just be like, this is the coolest thing ever. So I think, all of these things kind of added up. And then I was kind of really, really into architecture for a long time. And then I kind of kept this really kind of, and I think that's why even now when I make drawings or make paintings or whatever, I kind of approach them like I'm designing a 3D object, because I think I've always kind of thought of things as buildings, if that makes sense. I don't know where that is. I think it's just the way I've always worked.
So it sounds like you're thinking quite sculpturally.
Yeah. I think as well, like I think a lot about kind of material, and I think the thing that I really like about plywood is that it's a building material. And like I always kind of joke that like when I give up being an artist, I'm gonna cut all of my plywood paintings up and make furniture out of them, which hopefully won't happen. But yeah, I started off, when I started making all these plywood paintings, I started making things out of plywood because I was building furniture. So I started designing my own furniture and then making my own manuals for it. So I was trying to design a chair that you could cut out of one sheet of ply and build yourself, and it was all kind of, everything you needed was in this sheet of ply. Like even the fastenings were all out of the sheet. So, and then I had loads of plywood left over, so I started making all these paintings, and then I started making manuals for the paintings, for the furniture. And then obviously when I left uni, I didn't have the workshops anymore, so then I just had all of these manuals, and I was like, what am I going to do with all of these? And then now I've just got like an archive of them that I've ended up making all these paintings with.
Wow, that's a really interesting process that you've almost worked backwards, in the sense of you've created furniture but like one thing, and then you've created manuals for those. And when you said before, it'd be really, you don't almost say like you hope that it doesn't happen, that one day you'd cut up all your pieces and turn it into furniture. Like in a way, to me, that sounds quite cool, like for it to sort of come back in on itself, which is you've started at that point of making furniture, you've made the instructions, and then you've made these paintings, and then they could almost return back to that form, return back into some sort of furniture. I don't want to implant any ideas in your mind or anything like that. So
I think I was just when I said I didn't want it to happen, I meant I didn't want it to come to that where I had to do that. But I think it's something that I've been kind of playing with, because I kind of thought of it like, oh God, one day I might have to do that. And then, like you were saying, the more I thought about them, I was like, oh, it's actually an all right idea. Maybe I will start doing that.
I think that sounds amazing. If you could make instructions of that process happening again, so like, okay, this is, I'm not going to implant the ideas, but it would be quite interesting for it to sort of keep complexifying, because I guess the instructions are always about reducing something down. But if there was something that was like, it took you so long to get to where you were, to creating this furniture again, that you could never make the instructions all the way, or could you, if you were able to store them all? And wow, I really like that idea. I really like that. I definitely like that idea.
A little while ago, I was in a show that was curated by even Jenny, who I know have done the podcast before, because they're in Spaghetti Factory together, and they curated a show at System Gallery. And because I paint on flat sheets of ply, I have to kind of like make quite inventive contraptions of how to hang them, because obviously they're not like a canvas where they've got the kind of support on the back, so they're just completely flat. So sometimes I'll kind of like make all these very strange fixings, or they'll be kind of like recently I've been thinking more about using kind of like pulleys and ratchet straps and kind of making that part of the work. But at the time I had like really overly complicated fixings, which at the time I thought was the most simple thing ever. And then I dropped the work off, and then I got a phone call off the kind of director of the gallery, and he was like, Katie, I don't mean to be rude, but like, what on earth is this? What is this? So then I had to like design a manual for how to hang the painting, and then like go and drop it off at the gallery and just be like, I'm really sorry. And then for a while I've been thinking maybe I should make a painting of how to hang a painting, but the painting will be like, the manual will be the painting in itself. But yeah, I think sometimes when things get to that stage, you don't know whether it's gone too far and it's actually just not a good idea anymore. So yeah, there's a few things I'm sitting on while I decide whether it's a terrible idea or not.
Well, it sounds like you have an ability to complexify something and then simplify something, so you're able to create something really complicated and then be able to communicate that in a bit more of a simpler kind of way, which is through your instructions, that kind of thing. Yeah, so very interesting. Very interesting. When you would have said about the plywood and not plywood, what was the type of wood you said again?
Yeah, plywood. Yeah,
it is plywood. I would just think of using a Z hanger or a split batten or something like that. That's only because that's what I've learned when creating like a wooden thing. I'm sure you've heard of them before. Like I mean, I remember at one stage Googling in very descriptively what I was looking for, because I didn't know what it was called. I typed in split batten, and because that was how it was communicated to me, and nothing came out. I couldn't find anything.
Exactly the same thing. A couple of years ago, I was describing it to somebody, and they were just like, "That's not a thing. That's not what it's called." Like, yes, it is. And it was so hard. Isn't it really hard to describe what a split batten is?
Yeah.
Did you find out what the internet thinks that it's called?
Well, the only thing I found was a Z hanger. Z hanger. I've actually I've got one actually over there, and that's what I've used. I created this mandala at one stage. It was on a piece of MDF. It was just an MDF that I'd found, and I was trying to think of a way of putting this thing up without seeing any hangers and stuff. I just wanted it to be this form that just was on the wall and you couldn't see anything, and I managed to find that. But it took some doing, and you know, I've tried to describe to friends and a family like this. I'm saying I just need a Z hanger, and they're like, "What's a Z hanger?" I'm like, "Well, it's like it all slots in again." It's like, "Well, I don't understand how that works." Like, so yeah. It's these things that you have to think about when you're thinking about hanging artworks on the wall or trying to be creative in some way.
Yeah, I think because when I started working where I work, like I can remember everybody, all the people who weren't artists, all of the support workers and all the other staff were kind of like, how do you know how to do all of this stuff? Like, how do you know how to do like DIY? And you're like, well, because I'm an artist, you just have to learn how to do this stuff. But like I think it's so enjoyable. Like I've ended up the handy person at work because I'm just like, anything that I need to do, I'm like, I'll do it, because I think I just love like fiddling on and like fathoming things out. I think I just see something and I just feel like I need to work out how it works. But I guess that's like the absolute opposite of what my paintings are kind of doing, because like in my paintings I always give enough information for you to recognize things and have an idea of what's going on, but never enough for you to sort of solve things. So I think I kind of like play with the frustration of never really being able to build the thing that you think it is. And you're kind of not even sure if it is the thing that you think it is, but there's like little recognizable kind of crumbs of information. So, but maybe if I saw my paintings and I didn't make them, I would find them really irritating. So maybe that's why I make them.
It's interesting. I'm imagining you're not trying to create any sort of frustration in the job that you do at all. But it's interesting, I guess. You know, I'm really interested in when you're looking at a piece of art, what it does to your mind. And I had. It was probably a TED talk or something like that. It was talking about how your brain registers different, and I know Jenny McNamara is very interested in this kind of thing as well. Like your brain registering certain colors or certain images or whatever. And one that I had heard about was how your brain registers cartoons in a different place, and it's interesting with yours because you've then got arrows, which is something that you seem to see, spanning across time. Like if you look at some really old artworks, or even just some like geometric art, if it is some what they'd call primitive art, you see this sort of directionality to it, and you just understand it. You just understand that means, a direction. And it's just really interesting. It sounds like your work could be playing with different parts of your mind. So it's playing with the familiarity, it's playing with the instruction, the directionality, so many alities. But really interesting. It's a bit of fiddling. It's probably a good way of saying it.
I think I always think of my work being a bit like, have you ever seen those absolutely rubbish dot to dots that, like, do you know, the kind of dot to dot books where it'll be like a cat's face and body, but then the lines around the edge of the cat are in the dot to dot, and you think, I obviously know what that is because I can see the cat's face and the rest of its body. But then you kind of like, well, I'm gonna have to do it anyway. And you kind of, your eyes are like darting around doing this dot to dot, even though you kind of know what it is. And I kind of think of my paintings being a bit like that, like a recognizable waste of time exercise. But they're sort of fun, I think, anyway.
I wouldn't put you down like that, Katie. I definitely wouldn't do that.
That's a good thing.
I've got a few, like, because I have some questions here that I use as just standard questions when I speak to anybody, but I did add a few more this time, and I'm curious to know, I guess, what you'll make of these. So one of them is around collaborations and thinking about what would your what would your ideal, or like if you could have any collaboration with any artist, or were able to collaborate with someone doing anything, what would it be?
I've always, ever since I first saw them, been a little bit obsessed with Andrea Zatel's. She has, I don't know if you've seen them before, but she like has built these sort of habitation pods in the, I can't remember which desert it is, but in a desert. And people come and stay in these pods, and there's all there is like a bed and one hook to hang a hat, and you kind of just go with nothing, and it's like a communal thing, or you could just be on your own if you want, and you just come and exist in this thing that she's designed for you to live. And I think that kind of like designing the way that someone lives, I think would be a kind of interesting collaboration, because I think I'm kind of trying to kind of show people how to do things in a bit of a dysfunctional way, but then she's kind of giving people this kind of directing people into an experience in a totally different, interesting way. And I just think she's really cool. She's just so cool. And I just want to be in the desert for a bit as well.
That does sound really cool. I've never heard of her work before, but it was springing to mind an artwork that I'd seen in Berlin, which was like a pod, and it was like a living space, but it was super small. Everything was, but there was lots of curved shapes, and it made you realize actually how little you need in to actually live and function within a space.
I think a lot about kind of waste and furniture and owning things and things that you don't really need. So I think, yeah, when I saw those, I was just like, wow, that's so interesting that you can just live like that and that's all you really need.
I'm curious to know about any projects that you have in mind that it might be exactly what you've just said in terms of like working with that artist there. Is there any dream projects that you'd like to be doing that you maybe have had to begrudgingly accept you'll never make? I don't know.
I think what I think about a lot is like what I could do if I had a wood workshop at my disposal. I think about that pretty much every time I'm in the studio. So I would quite like to kind of, I would love to make some more furniture, but kind of with kind of what I'm doing now and kind of knowing what I've been doing and kind of applying that to what I was doing before, in making furniture, but obviously in a new way. So yeah, kind of making things more 3D again, and kind of building things. Like I think I kind of want to move towards sculpture a little bit more, because I think kind of I think a lot about kind of functionality, like the how things function and how things don't function and how they could. And yeah, I think that is something that comes across way more when I've been doing things in sculpture rather than in painting.
I mean, that to my mind, that doesn't sound like something that would necessarily be unachievable. Sounds like you're just are waiting for the right conditions into which to be able to achieve that. So it's good to have that kind of dream, because at least you're not living in frustration, which someone looking at your paintings might be. I'm wondering. This is another question that I'd come up with, which I'm quite interested to hear what you'll kind of come out with this one. So, do you have any advice that you would give to yourself 10 years ago if you could?
I think I would show myself loads of really good female artists, because I think it was like, because I remember being, I think one of the things that made me think that I couldn't be an artist was because when I was at school, I think we learned like 4 artists and they're all old men, and well, usually dead old men. And I think that was something that made me think, oh, well, that's not for me then. So I think I would probably just be like, yeah, look at these really cool women who are like doing all these great things. And yeah, I think I would have felt very kind of inspired by that. And I think as well, like, just don't really be as bothered about what people think about your work. Because I think when I was, when I first started making work, I was very like, oh, don't look at it's not finished yet. And then I missed out on loads of like kind of ideas that people would have had if they'd seen it halfway through. And they'd kind of, so I'd show people in the studio things when I'd finished, and they'd kind of say, oh, why didn't you do this? And I say, oh, I wish you told us that 2 weeks ago. So I think that's something that I wish, just be less bothered what people think about you.
Yeah, I'm totally with you in terms of equal representation of the artists that are being portrayed to aspiring young people, even if they're not interested in art. Just to be aware that that there's more than two female artists about. It's not just Georgia O'Keeffe and Frida Kahlo. There's so many female artists out there, and from what I'm seeing, I'm seeing that there are more female artists. Like, I know that when I was in college, like it was minority male. So but obviously there's been a turning. There's obviously been a turning of the tide at some point. But yeah, I completely agree. They need that representation, and the same with different types of people as well, like different ethnic origins, different sexualities, and I feel like we're living in such an exciting time because we're seeing more of that now. That there's a push to see all that stuff now. So it's like, keep diversifying the amount of art that you're seeing from so many different perspectives. Yeah. So, and I completely agree with you in terms of, don't be so bothered about what other people think, because it's either a case of, they might not understand the work that you're making, which is fine because you might not understand the work that you're making, but there's something very it's a journey, isn't it? It's a journey, the work that you create, and you don't know what direction it's going to go in. And as much as I see the value of critique, I do think it can be quite damaging sometimes, which is because people feel so interconnected to the work that they create. It's kind of bringing something from the inside out, and you can't help but mentally feel that that's a part of you out in space, and then somebody starts picking apart what you feel is yourself. So
I really do feel like you put a massive bit of yourself, just like a really vulnerable bit of yourself, like into public domain for somebody to just absolutely rip you apart. But then I don't know, like I kind of feel like if there's something to be said, like it's always going to be a constructive thing. Like if somebody just doesn't like something, then there's a reason for that. Like sometimes, I mean, that's just like a really interesting reason. And I just think, like kind of any conversations, I mean, 99% of the time, it's going to be a good thing. I think we just, I'm like, I feel very open to kind of conversations around my work. And I think, you do feel sensitive about things sometimes. You're like, oh God, a punch in the gut when somebody kind of really picks something apart, but then it's going to make your work better kind of long term and going forward. So I think it's always a really good thing. And I think it's a real shame that it doesn't happen more after you leave uni, because it just feels like, oh, you're out in the wild now, and then no one's ever really going to give you that much advice anymore. So it's really nice when that is something that can happen and does happen.
You said something quite significant there in terms of any conversation that happens as a result of looking at your work is a good thing, and I totally agree with that. And I have said, when you'll hear someone saying, "Oh, that's not art. I really don't like that piece of work," And what I've often said is, if you really don't like it and you don't want it to have a space in your life, don't think about it and don't talk about it. But to me, when somebody says that's not art, and then they have a lot of things to say about it, to my mind, I think that's clearly a piece of art, because like it's absorbing your attention in some sort of way, even though it might be negative, the way that you're responding to it. The power of the attention on the work of art, that to me, that's all it really needs to some aspect, which is an artwork needs to be able to grab your attention in some sort of way.
Yeah, and I think even if it's a really strong negative emotion, like that's made you feel a strong emotion. So it's like, yeah, there must be something good about it. Yeah, it must be interesting. Yeah, like a few of my friends have worked at galleries and like will come in and say, oh, somebody came and said this, and but I think they always had a really good comeback for it. Like if people would get really annoyed, oh, it's rubbish this, oh, my child could do this, and oh, it's like, well, didn't though, did they? Or like this thing is really interesting about it. And I think like, yeah, just that conversation is, I'm sure it must get very tedious for the people who work in galleries, but I think it's like a really interesting discourse.
I'm totally with you on that, and you can get stuck in. I've had experiences myself of maybe going into a gallery and with maybe not the right headspace at the time, and going in and starting to take the mick out of things, and really starting to take the mick out of things, and then at one stage, me partner coming up to us and going, "This artwork's about this," and then looking at it and going, actually it really is, and and being quite surprised, and then feeling quite bad that I maybe didn't come into the space with the right mindset, or but then again, what is the right mindset? You come in with whatever you're bringing in, don't you? But it's just interesting how pieces of work have the ability to kind of make you reevaluate. So even if it's the case of someone going into a space, I mean, I really like this idea of like someone going into a space and then just completely dismissing a work of art, but yet it sort of hovering in their mind, you know, for the next 20 minutes or for the next year or whatever, and not quite knowing why. And then at a later date, realizing why that was quite prominent to them.
Yeah, or maybe like somebody being so disgusted and outraged by how rubbish they thought that something was, that they go and tell all their friends how rubbish it was, and then all the friends go and think it's fantastic. Or even just the fact that they've stewed about it for so long, I think is just like, yeah, it's probably quite interesting. But yeah, like I always kind of think that the shows that I enjoy the most are kind of, because I never really like read things until I've been all the way around. So I usually do like a lap and then read all like the information and then do another lap, because I think, I don't know if it's because I'm obsessed with work and everything else, but I quite like to sort of just look at things and then see how I feel about things and see what I think about things and what I'm interested in, and then kind of reading the information and then see how that changes things, and the relationship between what I thought the first time and what I thought after reading the information. I think, yeah, that's something that I kind of always do. And I think the work that I like the best is when it's quite different, but the two things sort of play with each other. And yeah, I think that's what I like best when I go to a gallery, and it's something that I kind of have in mind when I make work. Like I think I don't think it's very good when people's work needs to be explained for you to enjoy it. So I kind of, when I make work, I try and make it so it's sort of interesting to look at, but then when you read about it, you kind of like, oh, all right, okay, yeah, that's different. And maybe that's less interesting, maybe it's more interesting, but it's slightly different.
I think you've kind of put in a little really good piece of advice there, which is when you're going into a space, allow your own experience to kind of interpret what you're seeing, as opposed to going in and reading the thing first at hand, and then, you know, everything that you see is framed within that, like initially. Because, you know, I go back to what I said before, which is sometimes the person creating it doesn't even know why they've created it, or doesn't actually quite understand it themselves. So it is an interesting exercise to ask artists to then write a statement about their work, because I feel like the process of creating works of art is, I mean, the reason you're creating a work of art is because you're trying to create something that you can't communicate in any other way. So you're then being asked to communicate what it is that you've created, which, in a sense, that I've created what it is, you know. It's, yeah, I don't know how I'm trying to, I guess, articulate the point, but
I know exactly what you mean, and I totally agree with you. I think you explained that really well. I think when you're making work, I never know when you should write when you should write about the work, because when you're making it, you still don't really know what you're doing, and then when you're finished, it's like a reflective thing. But surely when you write about it should be when you're in the middle of making it. So I think it's never really a true representation of kind of what you're doing anyway. And I think also, like, you shouldn't have to like the process of explaining yourself kind of makes it not a true thing, because none of us ever want to do it. We're always like, oh God, I have to explain myself now. I've already done the thing and I have to talk about it. And I think, yeah, if we wanted to do that, we would be writers and not artists.
Maybe there's a role in, you know, asking other people to write about your work and having an exchange that way, because, you know, it was only the other day, actually, one of my friends was who's also an artist, was you know, he'd written something about a series that he created and then sent it back to me, and I said, well, what you've entitled it doesn't kind of give the feel of what you've then described. You've kind of used a different type of language for the title series than you have for the way that you've written about it. And that's obviously just my kind of take on it, and I guess my preference would be to see something else, and then him sort of passing me what he'd written, and then me rewriting it, and then him feeling more confident about using that as opposed to his own words.
I think it's just, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it seems easier almost to write about someone else's work than it does your own. That's all I was really going to say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, like, I don't know about you, but I was always like brought up to be kind of like, oh, don't think about yourself. So like talking about yourself comes so unnaturally, because it's kind of like seen as really rude. And like when you sort of learning how to communicate, even like as a child, you're always like encouraged to sort of ask about other people. So suddenly when somebody's like, right, you make a thing and then put it into the world and then talk loads about it, you're a bit like, oh God, really? Like, this feels horrible.
It's a unique situation, isn't it, for creative people, for artists to, you know, be doing something and then have to describe what it is they're doing. Because, you know, if you want to get a new kitchen or something like that, and you get a joiner and you get a plumber, like after they've done that, you then don't explain, so what was the process, you know. They're not expected to sort of break down what it is that they've done and then how they feel about it, or what does it mean to them in 10 years time, this kitchen, you know. This kitchen, the impact, you know, where did I come from to create this kitchen? Like, it's a very unique position that artists are in, that they have to do that as well, or expected to do that. Not
Yeah,
fair.
and I think all the kind of standard kind of artist statement is maybe like 500 words, and I think, like, if you can't sum it up in 150, then it's too many things, or yeah, maybe like too diluted. Because I think as well, sometimes you end up just over explaining what you're doing, and then you kind of telling people what they're looking at. Like, I definitely think of that about my artist statement. Like, I'm kind of telling people what they're looking at, and I kind of feel like, well, that's your job. like you have to look at it and sort of work it out for yourself. I'm not gonna, yeah. So I think, yeah, it is a sort of strange relationship, and it's something that I detest doing.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, and it's just part of the environment that we're kind of in at the moment. Because if you think about Michelangelo, or the Renaissance artists, or countless other artists from the past, where they wouldn't have had to do that process. It's exactly what it was. The artwork communicates something, and you either see the same thing that the artist was trying to portray, or you see something completely different, and that was fine. So yeah, I'm with you on can we possibly return to that? But that's the dream, isn't it?
Yeah, I could just start submitting a kind of diagram for so if people are like, oh, can you send us 500 words? I'm like, how about a diagram instead with just 500 arrows on it? See how they feel about
that. Yeah. Maybe that's something else that you'll be starting very soon, Katie. The last question that I have here is a question I've asked each person, so you may already know that this question's coming up. One thing that you could change about the world, what would it be, Katie?
About the art world, or just the whole world?
Just the world, it says. So you could include the art world, however you'd want to respond to that.
I think this is a really cheesy thing to say. I can't believe I'm actually going to say this. But I think people should stop being so selfish all of the time. Like, I think people should start looking after the environment and just be nice to each other. I think is my very, very simple, but probably quite not simple. Maybe demand. I think I'm going to say it's a demand. Stop being so selfish. Yeah, so I think, I think quite a lot about kind of, as I said before, kind of usage and waste. And I think, if people could just stop that, I'd be pretty happy about it.
Yeah, that's every time I've asked that question, obviously each person sort of responded to it in a bit of a different way, and from what I'm hearing, from what I've heard from yourself, it sounds like there's a whole shift needs to happen, and it's been discussed in terms of a radical change in the way society is structured, the way we treat each other, the way we treat the planet, like just so that they're all encompassing. And I think when I'd initially thought of that question, I was just interested to sort of see what would come out with this. But the more I'm speaking to artists like yourself, Katie, and realizing that actually there's something universal in terms of the role of being an artist, the actual fact of being an artist, whether you consider that a role or just part of yourself, and wanting to change the world in some way. And the more I've thought about that, the more I think actually it makes perfect sense, because artists are creating stuff in the world which they're trying to inspire some kind of change, whether it's just a change in perspective or and introducing a thought or something like that. So yeah,
I think it's like a real great thing, like being an artist. You kind of are in this little canny community of people that are just quite like-minded most of the time and care about kind of similar things. And like, I think sometimes you end up in a little bit of a bubble of like people who are really respectful of each other, and all kind of looking out for each other and helping each other out and stuff. And then I think maybe things should be a bit more like that in general. But it's been really nice, because obviously where I grew up there was nothing like that. And obviously you're only moving 20 minutes down the road, up the road to Newcastle, is like in this really nice sort of community of artists. And it feels really good to be part of that. So I think if that was a sort of wider thing, that would be pretty nice.
I'm with you on that, Katie. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Katie. I'm wondering, Would you be able to let people know where they can find you if they want to find out more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram on a not very imaginative handle. It's like Katie Watson 123, because I'm not creative at all apparently. And my website, I don't know. I think it's
I know your website.
katie.com. I think that's right. But obviously I don't go on my own website very much. But is that right?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I've got the website, and I can put the website in the video. That's fine, so people can see it. And perhaps with Katie Watson 123, I don't know if maybe you would have thought about that. 123, 1, 2, 3, like one, like a step process. I don't know if that was intentional or whether that was just completely accidental, but something in that maybe. Well, thank you very much, Katie. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I hope we'll keep in touch.
You too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.